Hello everybody, welcome again to another episode of JayEmm Friends. Today, once more, it's myself, James, and my good buddy Ant. This topic has actually come from Ant, and it is that age-old dilemma. Do you modify your car or simply upgrade it? Which way is your money better spent?
And when we say upgrade, we don't mean upgrade it by modifying it, because that's the first thing that comes to my mind. We mean actually buy a completely new car. So don't bother making the one you've got faster, just buy a faster car.
For the sake of, balance, you're probably best off representing the modified side of this debate.
Well, this car might be ever so slightly modified. I was at a meet recently and someone said, "Oh, so what have you done to it?" I was like, "Oh, not very much, just a couple of things," and it spent 10 minutes reading off all of the changes from suspension, intakes, tuning, exhausts, carbon fibre, aero kits.
I think it would be fair to say a lot of people think that I don't like modified cars. But that's not true at all. I do really appreciate and quite enjoy a nicely modified car. It's actually quite an intangible thing. I love what you've done with this. It's a Japanese car. A Japanese car to me is just built to be modified. It's why, for example, I got my S2000 with a view to modifying it. Because out of the box, actually, I don't think the S2000 is anywhere near as great a car as people say. But in it I saw potential. Now, my S2000 is a topic for a whole other video. I've been doing the modified bit myself and was generally, up until about 2 years ago, really enjoying it. I like what you've done with this because actually I think your average sort of punter would look at this and maybe not even know that it was modified. Your philosophy with this, I know, has been OEM plus.
If Nissan were as, sophisticated a company as, say, Ferrari, and you could specify all sorts of interesting options like aero and suspension, this would be the Assetto Fiorano version of the 370Z.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I was going for, yeah.
Or as they do in America a lot. I know if you buy like a Mustang or stuff like that, there's I think it's a 100-odd page catalogue of performance parts from the manufacturer that you could just have fitted to your car. And even, we were talking about it off camera earlier, Audi with the R8 for I think quite a bit of its run, you could actually specify a lot of optional extras from the factory to be fitted to your car that sadly were never available here. And we'll pop up on screen a picture of the R8 Performance Parts Edition. And I know that looks like a car that's been quite heavily modified, and in some ways it is, but that's made up entirely of official, TÜV-approved factory bits.
And to be fair, this is the Nismo edition of the 370Z, so it has had the Nismo treatment already, and then I've just given it a bit more Nismo-ness.
Yeah.
Just to spice it up a little bit, because there was a certain amount of power that was there, but they never gave it to you. Mm-hmm. Obviously, they set the cars up, the engine management system, for the lowest common denominator, who isn't going to service their car regularly, who isn't necessarily going to, have an oil change and run it in properly. I was happy that I was looking after the car well enough that I could actually eke out that little extra bit of power from the car.
And of course, when you are modifying a car for yourself, you can do stuff like have it tuned, knowing that you're going to run it only on a certain type of fuel, where I know from a manufacturer's perspective, they have to map the car that you could put the dirtiest, lowest grade fuel in it and it won't break it.
Yep, and in fact, this car has got 4 separate maps that I can choose from the steering wheel, and one of them is a 95 octane map, just in case I get stuck, and I've actually needed that a couple of times.
Yeah.
But listen, we're not here to talk about the Z. That will also be the subject of another video, hopefully another review on your channel, now that I've made a few tweaks since its last review. Should you buy another car or should you modify it? And I think one of the first things to have in mind when you are having to make that decision, like that's, such a tough choice. When you are making that decision is, do you need a warranty? As soon as I tuned it, I said goodbye to my warranty, because if anything went wrong with the engine, the manufacturer would immediately say that, oh, well, it's because you've had it tuned and your warranty is invalidated. Now, I've actually had advice on that, and apparently they would have to prove that it was the map that caused the failure in the engine. It wouldn't just be a case of, oh, you're not covered. However, most manufacturers are just going to say, sorry, voided warranty, not covered, and then you'd have to go through the financial ombudsman and fight
and it is
legally.
Tricky because, especially when you've improved the performance of a car, a manufacturer then would have an argument to say, like, yes, we know you didn't touch the brakes, but the car has also now got 100 horsepower more than we designed it to have, and that's why they've failed, because you've pushed it beyond the performance envelope and so on and so forth. And I know there are people out there that think they can map a car and do things, and the manufacturer will never know. Trust me, if it's anything remotely resembling a modern car, or modern enough that it's going to have a warranty still, they will know.
Oh yeah, they will know for sure.
They have ways of knowing, because they'll be able to speak to the car and it will tell them that it's been doing things that it really shouldn't be capable of doing.
Also, usually the ECU, the ROM itself is sort of digitally signed, so if you modify it, it changes the digital signature on it, and they'll be able to tell just from that. It's not something that you're likely to be able to get away with, and I wouldn't suggest that anyone should ever do anything that's vaguely fraudulent anyway, so don't do that. But look, when I bought this car, I knew my plan was I was going to modify it. I was just going to get it checked out by the guys that I work with at AMI Motorsport, who have looked after this car very well over the years, and they said, yep, it's in great condition. They dynoed it, checked everything was running sweet before they even did anything to it, and we went from there.
And that's the thing, you'd had several, you had 370 and 350 previous, so I think you went into this knowing this was your intent to modify it, and also, and I think this has to be a key part of the debate, to keep it for some time.
Oh yeah, I never want to sell this car, ever.
No.
Like, someone could offer me £1 million tomorrow and I wouldn't sell it.
I'll sell it, I'll take it off his driveway. If someone wants £1 million, I will console him, so just putting that out there. Now, I think that the big thing for a lot of people is going to be the money side of thing, and it's not just the cost of doing the mods, because that obviously is massively variable, but you have to be aware of, when you're spending money modifying a car, I think the safest thing to do is to consider that money you're simply never going to get back.
Oh no, never.
I've seen cars up for sale where you're like, the car's £10,000 unmodified, someone spent £5,000 modifying it, and guess what, at the end it's worth £10,000.
Yeah.
Because in some circumstances, actually, a modified car can be deemed undesirable. The nature of mods means that they're all individual. Different people might want a modified car, but they want a differently modified car. And so for me, if you're the sort of person that does change their car every 2 or 3 years, I think financially it just makes a lot of sense to simply go for a different car.
And that brings us on to another point, which is, if you are changing your car every couple of years, there's a pretty good chance that you're probably financing those cars. And if you look at the actual contract of your lease or finance agreement, it will generally say you're not allowed to modify the car.
That is very important. I know that there are certain YouTubers out there who've sort of fallen foul of that in the past, and it's definitely something to be very much aware of. Modifying is something I often don't think of as a response, probably often enough. But when somebody comes to me and says, James, I've got car X and, I'm thinking of changing it for this or this, and often it's 2 quite different cars, the first thing I always ask is, what's wrong with your current car?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's actually a really, really minor thing that would easily be solved. I mean, to give you a really extreme example, I had somebody message me and say, what's the grip level like on I think it was a Ferrari F8 versus a McLaren 720? I said, well, they're pretty similar, to be honest, from what I recall. I haven't driven them in, fair back-to-back with the same tyres, same condition and all that, but generally speaking, they're both similar. And he said, I've got really, really bad grip problems with my he had a McLaren or whatever, and I'm thinking to upgrade to the Ferrari. And I said, well, hang on a minute. So your car's not gripping? I said, well, what tyres are on it? Oh, there's some old Pirellis. Like, do you not think maybe before you spend, I think at the time it was going to be 100,000 quid changing the car, maybe spend £1,000 trying some different tyres?
Yeah.
Because he actually liked his car. He really liked his car. He said, I just wanted to have more grip.
Also, it could be that the geometry needs to be addressed as well. So tyres, geometry can transform a car. I mean, we've experienced it ourselves. I've experienced it on this. Recently, I decided I wanted to put a front splitter on, so I lifted the front suspension up and was driving it around like that for quite a while until I got the front splitter on. Once it was on, I then wanted the suspension drop down, and I was also had added some spacers, and I just felt like the steering was going a bit wishy-washy. And I just took it into the guys at Abbey Motorsport. They put it on the Hunter alignment, dropped the front ride height a little bit. That puts a little bit more weight over the front, and that gave me that weighting in my steering back, and it completely transformed the way the car felt in the corners.
Yeah.
So, you know, I feel like between the spacers, the geometry, and the slightly forward stance on the car now, well, I'm going through corners, I'm just like, I'm in heaven.
Yeah, I would also say one of the big things I encounter a lot is that sometimes I see cars that have been modified at the expense of maintenance.
Yes.
You know, someone's bought a car and they've happily spent 1,500 quid on some coilovers because apparently this car wasn't handling right. And then you say, okay, well, did you look at the bushings and things? Oh no, didn't do them. Just stuck the suspension on. Great. So now you've got a brand new, you know, springs and dampers, but you're still on 20-year-old bushings that have disintegrated. Of course it's still going to be wayward. Very often I've driven older performance cars where all anyone has done is just keep the components fresh. And one of the best Subarus I ever drove was a sort of fairly standard example, and it had just been kept in good condition. And it felt amazing, just because it was all good.
Yeah.
When it comes to older cars, I quite like when people do sort of period correct modifications, because actually if you go back in the past, modifying a car was, I think, a far more universally accepted thing, probably because you're predating finance agreements, people were happier to work on the cars, it was easier to work on your car back in the day. So, you know, when you're talking about 1970s, 80s cars, you're like, yeah, put some different carbs on it, put a slightly different exhaust on it, put those period correct alloys on it, that sort of thing. I also quite like when people do subtle upgrades, like for example on, again, older cars or bikes, electronic ignition, because you're just making it a bit more usable, a bit more dependable, and ultimately it doesn't harm the car, it's just going to make it a bit more day-to-day friendly.
Yeah, so I think we've made a pretty strong case for why you would want to modify a car, and for some people though, they just won't, because it's so important for them to keep the car original.
Yeah.
And going back to the point that we briefly digressed from, if it's financed, you can't modify the car. And in fact, there are some quite well-known cases where people have modified their cars and then they found a phone call from their finance company coming through telling them that, I'm sorry, but we found out your car's been modified.
You all know who we're talking about, so you now
have to pay us all of the outstanding finance now.
Yeah, you don't want that to happen.
Yeah. So don't do that. It's not worth it. I bought this car outright, so it was part of the plan. Buy it outright, modify it from like as soon as the run-in period is over.
The other thing I've also found for anybody that is thinking about maybe going down the modification route is it will take a lot longer than you think.
Oh yeah.
And it will cost you more than you think. It's like any project.
Yep.
You know, it's like putting an extension on your house. Budget it to go over time, over budget. That's just what's going to happen.
You know, I've been hacking away at this car for 4 years now, 5 years, and I've still not finished. It's never going to be finished. There's always these little things that you want to do. A lot of it is just down to not having had the time, if I'm honest, to organise it, or other things going on that needed my money at the time.
I mean, the S2000, I think most people know, it broke. Some parts were fitted that I think maybe weren't in as good a condition as they should have been. It took the engine out, and I think the last time I did my maths, I've now spent triple the purchase price on modifying the S2000, which is slightly scary, which means, of course, I'm never going to sell that because I would never, ever recoup my investment. So as far as I see it, the only way to actually get that money out is to enjoy the car and drive it.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to have that car back, and you're definitely going to get it going that, because I'm pretty confident you're really... Did you even drive it beforehand?
Yeah, that was our first video together.
Oh, swapping
on my channel.
Yeah.
Wow. 6,000, 7,000. Oh man, I chickened out. Keep going. Still only 7,000 RPM. Oh my god.
That is the potential. There's always the potential something's going to go badly wrong. And of course, because you're modifying, basically, if it breaks, if it goes wrong, there's no warranty on that. There's no one to help you out. There's, you know, if you're really, really lucky and a modified part breaks, maybe the company will pay to replace the part that broke. But that doesn't always happen, and there's a good chance it'll have done damage to other parts. You're not getting that money back.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of sort of exceptions. I think there are one or two companies that sell like a pre-packaged tuning package for certain cars, and they'll give you that with a warranty.
Yeah.
You were talking the other day about back in the day for the Mark II Focus RS, you could go and get a mount tune upgrade.
Yeah.
That wouldn't affect the warranty. So there's been a few instances where you can get a certain degree of cover, but at the end of the day, for the most part, it's going to be on you if it breaks. Because if you take it to a tuner and something does go wrong with the engine, how are you going to prove that it was something they did, or rather that the engine wasn't properly, say, run in when it was bought, that it had, material damage, heat damage, because the person was ragging it from the dealers?
Yeah, if the car's 10 years old and got 100,000 miles on it already, I mean, how do you know? I think, again, that's one of the benefits of, say, Japanese cars, is that because the modding scene is quite prevalent, stuff like, say, the GTR, there's a well-trodden path for doing those upgrades. I also find it quite interesting, the difference in modification culture. So here in Britain, modding your R8, no one really modifies R8s here. Like, I've seen a few.
No one.
Yeah, but I've seen a few, very, very few. In the States, and the attitude towards it is very different. People do it all the time. They're like, yeah, of course I modded my car.
Yeah.
I think because, again, they've come out of the Mustangs and Camaros and Corvettes, where, again, it's just part and parcel of the ownership of the car, and it makes it more individual, which I really, really like. But when they make a car more individual, it does mean there's a good chance other people not really going to like what you've done.
And that is part of it for me, that yes, you can actually breathe new life into your car, make it feel like something new and fresh again. Every time I do something to this, it feels like a new car again. But at the same time, you're making it more and more you, and possibly less and less attractive to the next potential owner. So if it's a car that you're planning to get rid of, you always have to be a bit mindful of what mods you're actually going to do.
Yeah, I think there is, for me, I've driven quite a few modified cars now, and the most difficult thing is recognizing the point of no return.
Yes.
Because I would say actually the majority of cars can be improved in a way that most people could universally agree upon. Sporty car, make it sound a little bit fruitier. Nobody's likely to complain about a sports exhaust on a Porsche if it's a brand that people know. It's a well-respected thing. Lots of people do it. The odd remap here and there. Again, you're like, nobody's going to worry about a Litchfield Stage 2 modified GTR. People probably go looking deliberately for that sort of thing. But you do get to a point where you start to make a car, not necessarily so individual, but if you start to go for, say, particularly like the stance look, for example, the car gets low to a point where it actually begins to become unusable, or a suspension kit is put on that either isn't good enough quality or very often just hasn't been set up right. I've driven a few cars where someone's put actually good quality components on and then just dialed them up to maximum, and the car is horrid. For me, especially because I'm looking at the way a car drives rather than the way it looks or sounds, you've got to be really careful. And I think that's where getting an expert, helping hand in can be really, really helpful, because they'll know, okay, no, these cars really benefit from this, do this, they'll work. Sometimes even with certain cars, it's a subtle, I know in the McLaren world, for example, you just put some spacers on a car. Put some spacers, change the geo, you massively improve the car. You don't need to do any more than that.
We would be remiss to leave off the fact that your insurance is going to go up. Especially if you're younger. The younger you are, the more it goes up by. When I put the exhaust on this car, it only went up by about 30 quid or something like that, but that's because I'm in my 50s. Whereas if you're in your early 20s or late teens, I'm pretty sure that's going to go up. And whatever you do, if you are a young person, don't think you can get away with not declaring your mods, because you can find yourself in a very sticky situation where if they would have refused your insurance with those modifications, you are technically uninsured, even though you've paid your premium.
And actually, when it comes to certain modified cars, I know there are companies out there like Greenlight, for example, they actually like it if your car is more modified. Because they see it that the more mods on your car, the more you've spent on your car, the more you're probably going to try and keep it in good condition. And so they, make the assumption that you're going to look after the car.
Yeah, you care about it more, you're less likely to put yourself in a situation where you would bin it, because then you'd lose your pride and joy.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's one last point we have to make on downsides of modifying your car. There's a lot of modifications that you'll see on YouTube, like straight piping my Ferrari 360 Modena, etc., etc. I'm not talking about anyone in particular, of course, but I'm just saying technically those are illegal modifications.
You're absolutely right. Same goes for a lot of decatting, even certain remaps, things like that. I've seen garages now get into trouble for this sort of thing, so do be aware that this is a potential consequence. The chances of an actually severe penalty for this are relatively low. More than likely you'll get like a producer from the police and you have to return your car to standard. But I have actually seen it where cars have been sold from dealerships where the car has been, say, decatted, but then somehow MOT'd. And you go like, okay, so this MOT clearly is not a legit one.
Of course, they put the cap back on for the MOT and then took it back off again, obviously.
Yeah.
There's no MOT places out there that would ever MOT a car that didn't fully meet its emission standards, obviously. So just bear in mind that the modifications you might be doing might not be strictly legal, and make sure that the garage that you're working with that's making the mods, or the parts company is selling you the parts, making it very clear to you whether or not it's track use only or if it's actually legal for use on the road. And there was actually a garage earlier this year that got fined around £7,000 for selling someone and fitting parts that were not road legal. There was a decat and a few other mapping changes. They got fined for doing it, so they're probably going to get into more trouble than you will, because they didn't tell you that it's not suitable for use on the road.
Yeah, and so I think on that note, actually, I do support modifications, but I think the big thing really to take away from this is that anybody doing them has to know that there is a cost to it. Don't kid yourself into thinking you're just going to get the money back. If anything, I think the way to get your money back off mods is keep all the standard parts, and when you're done with the car, sell the modified ones, return the car to standard. That seems to be the most cost-effective method.
Yep.
The one thing I would like to say to everybody is, if you know some examples of either tastefully or, even better, untastefully modified cars, please send us a link in the description down below, and if we get enough of them in, I think we should do a video assessing some modified cars sent in by our readers at some point in the future.
Yeah, and don't worry if it appears that your comment wasn't actually visible. It will actually go into our moderation queue. We can actually see the links there. So finally, if all of that just sounds like an awful lot of hassle, and what you really want is a simple ownership experience where you buy your car, you get it serviced when it's supposed to be serviced, and then you move it on when you're done with it, because once you're bored with it, you want to get something different, then yeah, just buy a new car, upgrade your car to the next version or a different car altogether. But if you really love your car, and I really love this car, like I love it, then yeah, show it some love. Make some tasteful mods and make it your own, on the basis that you're probably never going to sell it anyway. And why not have the car that you want? We spend loads of money modifying our houses. Nobody keeps their house stock from the new build. They redecorate their home, they upgrade their kitchen. So why not do that to your car? That's just my opinion.
So then, that's another episode of JayEmm and Friends. A big thank you from myself and Dan, and we hope to see you for the next one. Don't forget, hit the like button, comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't already. See you soon. Bye-bye.